Morning of Helen's funeral, it rained so hard I could barely see the headstones from where I was standing. I remember staring at the casket and thinking that the rain sounded like applause. Polite, indifferent applause, the kind nobody actually means. There were maybe a dozen people there. Her sister Patrice, a couple of ladies from her book club, our neighbor Gus, who brought an umbrella and then gave it to me without saying a word. I stood under that umbrella and watched the water pour off the edges and thought, 63 years old, 31 years married, and this is what it comes down to. A Tuesday morning in November. A preacher who kept mispronouncing her name. My son Clifton wasn't there. My daughter Renata wasn't there either. Clifton had called me the night before. He said he had a work thing he couldn't get out of. Something about a client presentation in Dallas. I didn't say much. I couldn't. I just held the phone and listened to him explain himself and looked across the living room at the chair where Helen used to sit and read, and I felt something go quiet inside me. Not angry. Just quiet. Renata texted. She actually texted. Said she was sorry she couldn't make it, that flights were expensive, that she'd come visit soon. A text message. For her mother's funeral. I put the phone face down on the kitchen counter and didn't touch it again until morning. So I stood there in the lane with Gus's umbrella and I buried my wife and I did it alone. And I want to be honest with you because that's the only reason I'm telling this story. I wasn't even surprised. That's the part that broke me, really. Not the absence. The fact that I wasn't surprised by it. Helen and I had built something over those 31 years, a real life. A house in Maplewood, New Jersey, the kind of neighborhood where people still know each other's names. 3 bedrooms. A back porch she spent 20 years making beautiful. A garden she tended like it was her third child. We'd paid off the mortgage in 2019. She'd cried a little when we made that last payment. I'd taken her out to dinner at the Italian place she liked on Milburn Avenue, and we'd ordered the good wine, and she'd held my hand across the table and said, "We did it, Howard." Just like that, simple as that. We did it. She was diagnosed 14 months later. Pancreatic cancer moves fast. I don't know if you've ever had to watch someone you love go through it, and I hope you haven't. But it moves fast and it is merciless, and there is nothing you can do except be there. I took early retirement from my position at the county assessor's office. I became her driver, her pharmacist, her cook, the person who sat beside her bed at 3 in the morning when the pain got bad and held her hand and talked about nothing. About old TV shows, about the trip we'd taken to the Oregon coast in 2011, about what we'd plant in the garden next spring. Clifton came to visit twice in 14 months. Renata came once. They had their reasons. They always had their reasons. I'm not going to pretend I handled it perfectly. I called Clifton one night, probably 2 or 3 months into it, and I told him his mother needed him and he needed to come more. He got defensive. Said I was guilt-tripping him. Said he had a life, a job, a mortgage of his own. Said I didn't understand the pressure he was under. I sat in the kitchen after we hung up and thought, your mother is dying and you're talking to me about pressure. I didn't call him again after that, not to ask for anything anyway. Helen knew. She saw what was happening even when her mind got foggy from the medication. In her good moments, the clear-eyed ones, she would look at me with this expression I came to know very well. Like she was seeing something I couldn't see yet. About 6 months before she passed, on one of those clear days, she asked me to call her attorney. I remember being surprised. Helen had always handled her own affairs. She was organized in the way I never was. She had folders for everything, kept a binder with all our account numbers and insurance policies and every important document we'd ever signed. I'd always joked that if anything happened to me, she could run the whole operation without missing a beat. So when she said she wanted to talk to her attorney, I figured she was just being thorough, getting things in order. Her attorney was a woman named Celine. Sharp and calm, the kind of person who doesn't waste words. She came to the house on a Thursday afternoon and Helen asked me to stay in the room, which also surprised me. We'd always kept our finances a little separate. Not secretly, just privately. She had her accounts, I had mine, we had our joint account for the house and household expenses. It had worked for 30 years. I sat in the corner chair and listened. What I heard changed everything I thought I understood about my wife. Helen had been watching the real estate market in Maplewood for years, apparently. She knew exactly what our house was worth. Considerably more than we'd paid for it. Considerably more than I'd thought. She also had a second account I hadn't known about. Not because she was hiding anything, she explained calmly, but because she'd started it as a kind of emergency fund back in the 90s and just kept adding to it quietly over the years. A modest inheritance from her aunt, proceeds from selling her mother's jewelry. 20-some years of small, careful deposits. I looked at her from across the room. 31 years. She just smiled at me, that same clear-eyed look. She told Celine she wanted to transfer full title of the house to me alone. Just me. Remove her name entirely. She'd done some research, she said, and she wanted it done properly, with documentation that showed she was of sound mind and acting voluntarily. She asked Celine about having a mental competency evaluation done as part of the record. Celine asked her why she wanted that level of documentation. Helen glanced at me. Then she said very quietly, "My children." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The process took about 3 weeks. A physician came to the house and evaluated her. Celine filed everything with the county. When it was finished, the house, our house, the one we'd spent 30 years paying off together, was mine outright. Completely. And the account, the one I hadn't known about, she restructured that too. Not to me, and not to Clifton or Renata. To the grandchildren. Clifton had 2 kids. Renata had 1, and Helen set up a trust for all 3 of them. They couldn't touch a penny of it until they turned 25, and even then there were conditions. The trustee, which was Celine, had discretion to withhold funds if the money was going to be used in ways Helen had specified in writing. She thought about it. She thought about it a lot. I didn't find out the full details of the trust until after she was gone. She'd given me a letter, sealed, and told me to open it after everything was settled. She passed on a Wednesday night in October, peaceful, at home in our bedroom. I was holding her hand. That part, at least, was exactly as it should have been. I called Clifton and Renata that same night. Clifton said he'd come as soon as he could get a flight. Renata said she was so sorry. She was so sorry. I made the arrangements alone. I buried her alone. And then I went home and sat on the back porch she'd spent 20 years making beautiful, and I watched the sun go down over her garden, and I let myself feel all of it. 4 days after the funeral, Clifton showed up. He didn't call first. I heard the car in the driveway and looked through the window and saw him getting out of a rental car, and for one brief, stupid second I felt something lift in my chest. My son. Here. Finally. He came through the front door. I'd left it unlocked out of habit, and he stood in the entryway with his coat still on, and he said, "We need to talk about the house." I just looked at him. "Dad." He sat down at the kitchen table without being asked. I know this isn't great timing, but Renata and I have been talking, and we think, given the situation, it would probably make the most sense to list the property. The market is still strong, and frankly, it's a lot of house for one person to maintain. We'd split the proceeds evenly, the 3 of us. You'd have plenty of liquidity for a smaller place, maybe a condo, somewhere easier. Your mother's been gone 6 days, I said. He had the grace to look uncomfortable for about 3 seconds. Then he said, "I know, Dad. I know, but these things need to be thought through practically." Renata arrived 2 days later. Same conversation, different face. She was softer about it, more apologetic in her tone, but the words underneath were the same. Sell the house. Split the money. Maybe look at some senior living options while you're at it. She said senior living the way people say it when they mean something they don't want to say directly. I let them talk. I made coffee. I listened to both of them tell me, in their various ways, what should happen to the house their mother and I had spent 30 years building a life in. Then I called Celine. She came the next afternoon. I asked Clifton and Renata to be there, which they agreed to, probably because they assumed they were about to hear good news. Celine sat down at the kitchen table with a folder, and she went to it clearly and without any particular emotion, the way she did everything. The house had been transferred to my name alone 6 months prior, she explained. It was not part of Helen's estate. It was not subject to inheritance claims. The transfer had been executed while Helen was fully competent, documented, witnessed, and filed with the county. It was, in every legal sense, done. Clifton's face went through several things quickly. First confusion, then calculation, then something harder. "She can't just," he started. "She did," Celine said. "She was of sound mind, acting voluntarily, and the documentation is complete. There's nothing to contest." "What about the accounts?" Renata asked. Her voice had gone flat. Celine told them about the trust. She explained the terms, the age requirement, the trustee discussion, the conditions. She told them who the beneficiaries were, their children. Not them. The room got very quiet. Renata looked at me. I think she was waiting for me to apologize, or to explain, or to say something that would make it softer. I didn't have anything to say. I looked back at her and thought about the text message she sent while her mother was being buried in the rain. Clifton pushed back hard after that. He hired an attorney of his own, a man out of Newark who sent a letter about undue influence and questions of capacity. Celine handled it. The physician's evaluation, the documentation, the timing, everything had been prepared exactly for this reason. Helen had known. She had known exactly what she was doing, and she had made it airtight. Clifton's attorney sent 2 letters, then nothing. I won't tell you the next few months were easy, because they weren't. It's a particular kind of loneliness, losing your wife and your children in the same season. There were nights when I sat on that back porch and I couldn't tell what I was grieving anymore. Whether I was crying for Helen or for the family I thought we'd made. I'd look at the garden and think about how she used to be out there before the sun was fully up in her old green gloves, and I'd think she knew. She saw this coming and she still chose peace. She protected me and she still chose peace. She protected me and she still found a way to protect her grandchildren too, even from their own parents, even from the thing their parents had become. I found a grief group at the community center in Maplewood. A Thursday evening thing, folding chairs, bad coffee, good people. I started going in February. I met a man there named Gil who'd lost his wife to Alzheimer's 3 years prior, and we became the kind of friends you can only become through shared weight. We go to breakfast sometimes on Saturdays. He doesn't talk much, but when he does, it counts. I opened Helen's letter in December after the legal situation was resolved. She'd written it by hand, which she almost never did anymore. Her handwriting had gotten shaky from the medication, and she knew it, and I could tell she'd taken her time with every word. She wrote that she was sorry for things I didn't think needed apology. She wrote that she hoped I'd keep the garden going, even just the roses, even if everything else went to seed. She wrote that she'd known for a while that the children had changed, and that grief had changed them more, and that she didn't blame them entirely, but she couldn't leave me unprotected. She wrote, I have always believed that love is an action, not a feeling. I am acting now. I read that line 4 times sitting at the kitchen table. Then I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope and went out to the garden in my coat, in the cold December air, and I just stood there for a while, looking at the rose bushes she'd planted the summer we moved in. I talk to Clifton occasionally now. Renata less. The conversations are careful and short, full of things we don't say. I don't know if that will ever change. I hope it does. I hope they look at their own children someday and understand something they don't understand right now. But I've stopped waiting for it. The house still smells like her. A little in the mornings. The garden came back last spring, the roses especially. Better than they'd been in years, like they were showing off for nobody. I started keeping a bird feeder out back, which she'd always wanted me to do, and I'd always put off. It turns out she was right. It turns out it's a good thing to have. Something alive and small and busy just outside the window while you drink your coffee. I am 63 years old. I am alone in a way I never expected to be. I am also, in some way, I'm still working out how to explain exactly where she wanted me to be. Safe. In our house. With her roses. She thought of everything. She always did. I still think about that line Helen wrote. I have always believed that love is an action, not a feeling. I am acting now. I've turned it over in my mind more times than I can count, standing in the garden, sitting at the kitchen table in the early morning before the house fully wakes up. She wrote it with shaking hands. She meant every word. What happened to my family didn't happen overnight. That's the thing people don't want to hear, but it's true. The distance between me and my children didn't open up in the days after Helen died. It opened slowly, over years, in all the small choices they made about what mattered and what didn't. Every phone call not returned. Every visit not made. Every time they looked at their mother's illness and calculated what it would cost them personally to show up, the end wasn't the cause. The end was just when everything that had already happened finally became impossible to ignore. I don't say that to excuse myself either. I made my own choices. I stopped asking. I went quiet when I should have pushed harder. There's a version of this where I fight for those relationships earlier, more honestly, and maybe things land differently. I don't know. What I know is that by the time Clifton walked into my kitchen 4 days after his mother's funeral and talked to me about real estate, something had already been decided long before that moment. He'd been deciding it for years. So had Renata. So quietly had Helen. What struck me most, When I finally understood what she'd done, wasn't the legal strategy of it. It was the clarity. She'd looked at the situation with completely clear eyes, no anger, no self-pity, no illusions, and she'd acted on what she saw. That takes a kind of moral backbone that most of us spend our whole lives trying to build and never quite get there. She didn't punish anyone out of spite. She protected what needed protecting. And she trusted the light people, her grandchildren, Celine, me, with what she had left to give. That's not revenge. That's integrity, applied with precision. I've thought a lot about what I want to carry forward from all of this. Not bitterness. I've made a deliberate choice about that. Every morning, the way you make a choice to get up and put your feet on the floor. But I do want to carry her example. The way she used her mind when everything in her life was falling apart. The way she thought 3 steps ahead. Not out of paranoia, but out of genuine care for the people she loved. The way she didn't wait for someone else to fix it. There's a kind of strength that doesn't make noise. It doesn't announce itself. Helen had that her whole life. I just didn't always see it while I was standing right next to it. I see it now. I see it in the roses that came back better than ever last spring. I see it in the trust she set up for her grandchildren, conditions and all, making sure the money would actually reach them in a way that meant something. I see it in the seal letter she left me, handwritten despite the shaking, because she wanted me to have her words in her own hand. I'm 63. I'm learning, late, that the people who love us most sometimes show it in ways we only understand after the fact. And I'm learning that the right response to that kind of love isn't grief, exactly. It's to try to deserve it, to keep the garden, to show up, to be the person who acts, not just feels. She thought of everything. The least I can do is try to think more clearly too.